Imagine you wake up one morning and find that your neighbourhood has become transformed into one of the trendiest places in London. New cafes have opened up, new apartments line the streets, the roads are cleaner, and investment is flowing in. By almost every measurable factor, the area has improved. But a couple of months pass, and suddenly your rent has doubled. The local businesses that have been there for years have disappeared, and the neighbours and families that have lived there for decades are moving out. And suddenly a question emerges. When the city improves, who is it really improving for? Today, I wanted to explore the concept of urban regeneration, often seen as a form of salvation and a way of bringing seemingly hopeless and deprived areas back to life. But beneath these shiny new buildings and impressive statistics lies a more important story. Because regeneration can create prosperity, but it can also create the often detrimental cycle of displacement. And it's crucial to identify ways in which we can implement regeneration in a more inclusive way. Economically, regeneration can be transformative and create widespread prosperity which benefits the entire nation. One of the most famous examples, which many of you will be familiar with, is the London Docklands transformation into the world-renowned financial hub of Canary Wharf. In the 1970s, the Docklands had become derelict with abandoned industrial sites and overall decline. Today, in its place, stands Canary Wharf, one of Europe's largest financial districts. Regeneration created 120,000 jobs, creating prosperity for all of Britain, as well as wide-scale infrastructure projects, such as the Elizabeth Line, which dramatically improved connectivity. And benefits aren't only economic, but urban regeneration can save urban regions from falling into the cycle of cumulative causation. Deindustrialization leads to unemployment, which in turn reduces investment levels, reduces spending, and overall solidifies the decline of the area. The King's Cross station also shows how impacts can be more than just economic. With improved transport, public spaces, residential areas, and overall quality of life. What was once a run-down, derelict area to now being one of Europe's most widely celebrated examples of urban regeneration. Considering all of this, regeneration seems undeniably positive. But there is another side to the story. Because as areas become more desirable and prices of buildings increase, rent increases, and lower income residents might find themselves priced out. Take Brixton. With one of the most strongly historical Afro-Caribbean identities, and being one of London's most culturally distinctive areas, today that identity remains prevalent. But as certain areas increase in value and an influx of wealthier residents moves in, many areas might find themselves talking about concerns surrounding affordability and community character retention. In other words, those who shaped the area are moved out, while the buildings that they've shaped remain. And displacement is also not only economic, it can also be cultural. And Shoreditch provides an excellent example of that so-called cultural displacement. With also what was once a lower class, run-down area, low rent attracted creatives and artists, who then built a culture of street art, food markets, music venues, and projects such as Box Park Mall. Ironically, that culture is what enticed investment. And luxury firms, tech developments, and again an influx of wealthier residents moved in, pricing out those who served to shape that community. In other words, regeneration preserved the infrastructure while displacing the culture. We might refer this problem to one of the most famous ancient philosophical paradoxes, which some of you might be familiar with, known as the ship of Theseus. If we replaced every plank of the ship, in the end, is that still the same ship? And likewise, if we replace every road, building, and resident in an area, in the end, is that even still the same area? And more importantly, what are the impacts of so profoundly changing the ship on its crew members? or changing the city on its residents. We might then discuss the ideas brought about by the French philosopher Henri de Fabre, who brought up the idea of the so-called rights to the city. He suggested that urban spaces should be shaped by those who inhabit the area, rather than simply those with the greatest economic power. An example of this being implemented successfully is Medellin in Colombia. Originally associated with high crime rates, violence and inequality, social urbanism was employed in the area, allowing investment to be directed to those who needed it most, the lower income residents of the area. With projects such as the Metro cable system, connecting isolated hillside communities with jobs and opportunities closer to the town centre, Medellin demonstrates that displacement is not an inevitable consequence of urban regeneration, but is simply something that occurs when investment is targeted towards economic growth rather than helping those who have already lived there. So, what could change? Right now, urban regeneration focuses most on economic growth, private profit, and investment levels. But what if city planners decided to focus more on community retention, social mobility, inclusion, and affordability? The goal would become regeneration without displacement, a city that grows without leaving its people behind. Because we're all for a gold-plated luxury ship as a replacement for the possibly less enticing ship which we've begun with, so long as we get to stay and enjoy that newness. Urban regeneration undoubtedly creates prosperity, but that prosperity is rarely shared equally. However, displacement is also, as we have seen with Medellin, not an inevitable consequence of regeneration. And it matters most who the investment is directed towards. So the question when assessing urban regeneration should not simply be whether it's good or bad, or rather, when a city improves, who gets to stay and enjoy that improvement? Thank you.